The Holy Gospel according to Luke. Now, as Jesus and his disciples went on their way, he entered a certain village, where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to him and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her." The Gospel of our Lord. Distractions. They seem to be everywhere, don't they? As we go about our daily lives, there seems to be no end to the distractions that seek to disrupt our focus. How many of us have ever been in a meeting that was going a little longer, maybe a lot longer than we had anticipated, and found ourselves distracted with thoughts of the mounting emails in our inbox, or the to-do list that seems to be growing by the second? Maybe it's that next meeting or visit on the schedule that we just can't help but wonder if we're going to make on time. And in this day, with all the benefits that technology brings, how often do we find ourselves distracted by the next phone call, text message, or even the news headline coming across our phone, or even on the technology that we wear? It seems that distractions are a part of life, and they always have been. And as we look to our gospel lesson today from Luke, we find Jesus continuing his journey to Jerusalem, and we find the well-known story of Martha and Mary. As Jesus and his disciples enter a certain village, Martha welcomes them into her home. She is living out hospitality, providing shelter and food to these travelers. And as the story plays out, we find that distractions are not just something that we have to deal with in our modern world. The nature of the distractions might be a little different, but Martha, just like us, experiences distractions in our lesson today. While Martha is distracted by all the tasks to show hospitality to the guests she's invited into her home, we find Mary, her sister, sitting at Jesus' feet and listening to what he has to say. The situation itself becomes a distraction for Martha, and she takes her concern to Jesus, that Mary should be helping her rather than sitting, doing nothing, and listening to him. Now, I suspect that many of you can relate to Martha. I know that I can. In this case, I first thought about family, right? And I thought about my brother, right? I identifying with Martha and him as Mary. I'm sure he would see it a little differently. But it's not just family, is it? Don't we see these situations with friends or even co-workers? As we look to this scene in Martha's house, we find that the scene could be written about us. And through that, we see how Luke's gospel speaks throughout the generations. We experience frustration and distraction, just like Martha did. The story progresses with Martha making her request to Jesus to tell Mary to come and help her. And Jesus makes his response. "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken from her." Now, many scholars have looked at this response from Jesus as a rebuke to Martha. And I think that if we consider the story as one standing on its own, we can certainly read it that way. But something seems a little wrong with that, doesn't it? I mean, wasn't it just this past week that we found Jesus challenging the lawyer, asking him, "Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The lawyer responds appropriately that it was the Samaritan, the least likely to be expected the hero of that story. It was the Samaritan who showed the man mercy. Jesus then tells the lawyer, "Go and do likewise." In this parable, the message is one of taking action, of showing mercy, of being a neighbor to those around us. So as Luke's gospel goes directly from the parable of the Good Samaritan into this morning's story of Martha and Mary, it seems just a little confusing that Jesus would be rebuking Martha for trying to get things done, trying to be a good neighbor and to show hospitality to the guests that she's invited into her home. Given this rather confusing interpretation, I think we should reconsider Jesus' response to Martha. While the response has often been interpreted as a rebuke of Martha, many people see it as a much more compassionate response from Jesus. "Martha, you are worried and distracted by so many things, but there is need of only one thing. I am right here." When we look at Jesus' response to Martha as this compassionate response, it's one that not only speaks to Martha, but to all of us as well. There is work to be done, but it isn't all about the work. It's also about sitting at Jesus' feet, immersed in the Word. I don't think it's a coincidence that Luke has put the parable of the Good Samaritan and Jesus' visit with Martha and Mary back to back. The stories are meant to be read together to give us a clearer picture of discipleship. And while we may be reading them over the course of 2 weeks, we can still consider them together. When we consider these stories as working together to provide a picture of discipleship, we find ourselves with another both-and situation. Discipleship is both about doing and about being. It's not one or the other. There is work to be done, but sometimes the work itself can become a distraction when it isn't connected to the Word. Time is also needed to sit at the feet of Jesus and to listen to and be immersed in the Word. In these times when the work, whatever work it is acting as a distraction, we may need to be a little more direct, more intentional with sitting at the feet of Jesus. As I was preparing this week, I came across a quote attributed to Martin Luther, and he says, "Work, work, from morning until late at night. In fact, I have so much work to do, I shall have to spend the first 3 hours in prayer." Now, you might be stuck a little bit on that 3 hours part, but I think what this really speaks to is yet another aspect of discipleship, knowing ourselves. What is it that each of us need to be able to get past all the distractions in our lives? Prayer, time spent with Jesus, is one of those things that can help us remain focused in the midst of all the distractions and help us in our journey of faith and discipleship. Now, whether you were following along on Facebook throughout the week or you just got your first glimpse with the slideshow here this morning, I think you've seen an image of what discipleship can look like in our world today. Last Sunday, we sent 26 of our youth and adults off in mission and ministry to Jackson, Ohio. We sent them off in prayer for learning, for growth, for service and fun together, all for the sake of Jesus Christ. I haven't yet heard all the stories of what happened in Jackson this past week, but through the pictures I saw posted, I saw an image of discipleship. It's one that included a lot of service, of being the neighbor that we found modeled by the Samaritan. I also saw pictures of prayer and study and reflection, of sitting at the feet of Jesus. And I also saw plenty of fun and fellowship, a reminder that as we move along in our journeys, we are not alone. Even as we explore this multifaceted image of discipleship, we may not have a complete picture, but I think we do have a richer image of what discipleship is. As we look to our own journeys, don't we see that there are times when we need to take action and do the work, and other times when we need to be a little more reflective? These times are different for each of us, just as each of us are different. We will likely find times when we think that those around us are sitting at the feet of Jesus when they should be working, and times when it's just the opposite. When we find ourselves distracted with these thoughts, maybe we can come back to Jesus' compassionate response to Martha. You are worried and distracted by many things, but there is need of only one thing. Jesus is here with us, just as he was there with Martha, willing to remind us time and time again that he is the one thing that we need. No matter how often we find ourselves worried and distracted, Christ is with us, opening his compassionate arms and inviting us to sit at his feet. Amen.